The vet could barely see it at first, something trembling inside a cardboard box at the shelter's doorstep. When he lifted the blanket, his breath caught. It wasn't just small. It was the tiniest puppy he'd ever seen, barely the size of a thumb, shivering, whimpering, fighting to breathe. Everyone in the clinic froze in silence. The vet reached out a finger, and the little creature wrapped its paws around it like a baby holding on for life. No one knew where it came from or how it had survived this long. But when the vet discovered the truth about why this tiny puppy existed, his eyes filled with tears, and his life would never be the same again. It was just after sunrise when the shelter worker noticed a small shoebox outside the clinic door. The cardboard was damp from morning dew, wrapped in an old towel. At first, they thought it was empty, until a faint, trembling sound came from inside. Carefully, they peeled back the blanket, and everyone froze. Inside was the tiniest creature they had ever seen. Smaller than a teacup, no heavier than a few coins. Its eyes were half open, its breathing shallow. "Is that a mouse?" someone whispered. But when the vet, Dr. Lewis, looked closer, his heart stopped. "No," he said softly, voice trembling. "It's a puppy." He lifted it gently with 2 fingers, afraid his touch might hurt it. The little one whimpered, a weak, desperate sound that pierced the room. "He's fighting," Dr. Lewis murmured. "He wants to live." They placed the puppy on a heating pad, wrapped him in soft gauze, and watched as his tiny chest rose and fell like a flickering flame. No one believed he'd survive an hour, but as Dr. Lewis leaned close, the puppy's paw twitched, curling around his finger. And in that moment, the vet made a silent promise. He wouldn't let that tiny heartbeat fade. The clinic lights stayed on long after closing. Dr. Lewis refused to leave the tiny puppy's side. He built a small incubator from a glove box, lined it with cotton, and placed a tiny bottle of warm water beside him for heat. The puppy was too weak to lift his head, yet every few minutes, his tiny chest would rise again, defying the odds. Lewis named him Bean, for the way he fit perfectly in the palm of his hand. Hour after hour, he fed Bean with a dropper, each drop a battle between life and time. "Come on, little one," he whispered. "Don't give up now." The assistant, watching quietly, murmured, "It's like he knows you're trying to save him." At dawn, Bean's breathing grew steadier. But when Lewis placed a stethoscope on his chest, his brow furrowed. The heartbeat wasn't faint. It was powerful, rhythmic, far too strong for his fragile body. "That's impossible," he whispered. Bean opened his tiny eyes then, deep blue, glinting in the morning light. He let out a small squeak, not of fear, but of determination. Tears welled in Lewis's eyes. "You're not ordinary, are you?" he said softly. For the first time, hope filled the room, and the fight had only just begun. Days turned into weeks. And against every medical expectation, Bean continued to live. Dr. Lewis documented everything: his feeding times, his temperature, his reflexes. But what fascinated him most was Bean's mind. The puppy seemed to understand things far beyond instinct. He recognized voices, reacted to emotions, and turned his head every time someone spoke softly near him. By the end of the first week, Bean stood on shaky legs. By the second, he walked, his tiny paws barely making a sound on the clinic counter. Dr. Lewis smiled every time he saw that little spark of courage. "You're unstoppable," he whispered. The other staff members called him a miracle. But Lewis couldn't ignore what came next. During a routine check, he discovered something impossible. Bean's growth had halted completely. His body wasn't developing like a normal puppy's, but his senses and awareness were accelerating. He learned commands almost instantly, even mimicking simple hand gestures. One evening, Lewis noticed Bean pressing his paw on a heart monitor, copying the doctor's motions perfectly. Lewis chuckled softly, then froze. There, beneath the fur on Bean's neck, something metallic caught the light. He parted the hair and gasped. A microchip, smaller than any he'd ever seen. "Where did you come from, little one?" he whispered, and in Bean's glimmering blue eyes, the truth seemed closer than ever. That night, Dr. Lewis couldn't sleep. The image of that strange metallic glint under Bean's fur haunted him. At dawn, he returned to the clinic, turned on the examination lamp, and scanned Bean's neck. There it was again, a microchip, but unlike any he'd ever seen. It was too small, too advanced, and untraceable by standard scanners. Determined to find answers, Lewis searched veterinary research archives and private medical databases. After hours of digging, he stumbled upon a restricted file labeled Project Aurora. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were images, tiny canines bred in secret government trials, engineered for medical empathy, able to detect human pain and illness through emotional resonance. They were meant to help humans heal. But every test subject had died within weeks. Terminated, the report read. All prototypes destroyed. Lewis stared at Bean sleeping peacefully in his palm. "You're not supposed to exist," he whispered. "Someone saved you." Before he could think further, headlights flashed outside the clinic. Two men stepped out of a black car, dressed in dark coats, carrying briefcases. "Dr. Lewis?" one asked, showing a badge. "We're here for the specimen." Lewis's stomach dropped. He clutched Bean close to his chest. "He's not a specimen," he said firmly. "He's a life." And from that moment, he knew he had to protect him, no matter the cost. The rain poured hard that night, masking the sound of Dr. Lewis's trembling breath. He packed a small bag, medical supplies, a blanket, and Bean wrapped carefully inside his coat. The two men's voices still echoed in his head. "We're here for the specimen." He knew what that meant. If they took Bean, he'd never be seen again. Lewis slipped out the back door, his headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. The roads were slick, and the wipers barely kept up. Bean stirred in his arms, letting out a soft squeak, like a question. "Shoo," Lewis whispered. "I'm not letting them hurt you." In his rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of headlights. Closer, faster. Panic gripped him. He swerved down a side road that led deep into the forest. Mud splattered across the windshield as he turned toward an old cabin he used for rescues years ago. Inside, he lit a lantern, the dim glow reflecting off Bean's fur. Outside, car doors slammed. Footsteps. Voices. Lewis held his breath, clutching Bean tightly. Then, the strangest thing happened. Bean's tiny chest began to glow faintly, soft, pulsing light flickering in rhythm with his heartbeat. Outside, the men froze. Inside, Lewis whispered, "It's okay, little one. You're safe now." Morning sunlight filtered through the cracks in the cabin roof, casting soft gold over the wooden floor. The storm had passed, leaving the world eerily quiet. Dr. Lewis sat beside the fire, Bean nestled in his palm, still faintly glowing. He hadn't slept, too afraid to close his eyes. But now, in the peace of dawn, he finally exhaled. Days turned into weeks. No one came for Bean again. Dr. Lewis moved to a small countryside clinic, far from the city, raising Bean in secret. The puppy stayed impossibly tiny, but his strength grew beyond measure. He could sense when patients were in pain, curling beside them, his warmth easing their tremors. Word spread of the miracle puppy, the one who could heal hearts just by being near. Months later, a news headline appeared. "Tiny dog brings hope to dying children." Dr. Lewis watched the story on screen, eyes glistening. "You did it, Bean," he whispered. "You were made to heal." And you did. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Bean rested on Lewis's lap, heartbeat steady, eyes soft and blue. Sometimes, the narrator's voice fades in gently. The smallest souls carry the biggest miracles. And sometimes, one tiny heartbeat can remind the world what it means to care. The camera fades to black. Soft piano music swells.